Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Annie. I want to start out very quickly with what is going to be a very, very high-level, quick synopsis of a project that lasted about 10 months over this past year. It was a federally funded study that really was designed to look at how do all the different components of the Vermont economy work together. What are the key levers that we can address, and what are some of the initiatives that we can take to move the economy forward? As you have probably understood and heard, when we talk about workforce, there's also an issue of housing. When we talk about housing, there's also an issue of finance. And this study really tried to look at how do those different factors work together and what can we do to address them. So the study was really born out of the governor's strategic plan, and has its own mission to improve the economic well-being of all Vermonters while maintaining our quality of life, natural resources, and community values. We worked with an outside team of consultants. We went around the state, really listening to all sorts of different constituencies and all sorts of different groups, ranging from state government, regional government, and citizens. We came out with 4 really primary action goals. And I'm going to address them not in this particular order, but they were really to make financing available, to educate for a great workforce, to help businesses flourish, and to build for the future. And the full executive summary is on your table, so you can take that home. And if you want more detail, there is lots on thinkvermont.com. There were 4 additional goals, too, that just kept coming up over and over again. And that was that we need to preserve our working landscape. We need to enhance the Vermont brand. We need to cultivate innovation. And we need to plan for resiliency. In looking at this, too, we wanted to come up with an overarching and measurable goal. And we settled upon the genuine progress indicator, which is actually in statute. How many of you are familiar with the genuine progress indicator? Okay. So I was not either before I started this, and it's something that I have really come to appreciate and love. What the genuine progress indicator does is it takes into account economic factors. So 70% of the genuine progress indicator is made up of GDP. But you can increase GDP if you denude all your forests. You can increase GDP if you have a high prison population. You can increase GDP even if you have high poverty. So what GPI does, and this was developed by the Gund Institute at the University of Vermont, is factors in sort of negative points for environmental degradation and negative or positive points for social measures. And this is all using measurable statistics. So we set our overall goal of increasing genuine progress indicator by 5% over 2020. We also want to set really measurable goals for each of our target areas. So in the question of can we bring more financing into the state, net dollars into the state of Vermont, we set what I thought at the time, and this was all developed about over the last year, a fairly ambitious goal of, yes, let's increase the money coming into Vermont by $1 billion over the next 5 years. One of the ways we broke that down to really see would this be possible was, how much could we get in through foreign direct investment, particularly through programs like EB5. And we estimated probably $300 million. The good news, we're already at $100 million 1 year into this. Renewable energy and efficiency investments. Every dollar we spend on energy that stays in the state as opposed to going to outside fuel sources can be reinvested. And we're actually moving very close to this number, and I think this will be fairly achievable. And then a number of new investment instruments. We set these goals, and then we also set out a number of different ways that we plan to achieve those goals, and we call those things initiatives. These were developed in a series of brainstorms. Some of them I think are very ambitious, some of them I think are very realistic, some of them are actually underway. I'm going to go through the initiatives fairly quickly and then spend more time when we get to the workforce section. But we looked at expanding the EB5 program, which is happening. The Entrepreneurial Lending Fund for Small Businesses was passed in Act 199. Strengthening Vermont investment and employee ownership, and that certainly is happening through this Vermont Small Business Offering Exemption. working with our regional development corporations on other organizations to do statewide workshops around financing, and to build out the angel investor and mentor networks. Physical infrastructure was another key area, and we really said we need to start building for the future. We recognize we have an aging infrastructure. We recognize that affordable housing and housing that is affordable is a challenge for workforce, and it's a challenge for businesses. So we looked at improving telecom so that broadband and cell service will be available to all economic hubs. We have a very ambitious renewables goal, and I think we are on track towards trying to approach that. That we meet all the needs for wastewater, water, and the total maximum daily load for Lake Champlain, and that we improve our air, roads, and rail in economic hubs. We have identified some of the initiatives, which would be to create municipal SWAT teams to work with different towns to kind of create a concerted approach to development, to assess telecom prioritization, building out rail, and designated airport expansion. And I'd say at least 2 of these are actually underway, so that's exciting. The third key area was to help businesses flourish, and really to try to improve the business environment. Again, we work very closely with our partners, the regional development corporations, small business development centers, to try to educate and help businesses. And here we have the classic measure of increasing GDP 4% by 2020. Some of the things we are doing in that area, we are working with the Secretary of State's office on a one-stop shop portal, which allows businesses to register and to do a lot of their compliance work online. And that's going to be up and running shortly, as well as providing access to all the service providers, training providers, workforce assistance. We are in the process of working with a variety of incubators and accelerators around the state to really try to build out a strong network that will help young businesses and small entrepreneurs grow. We have been working across a number of different areas to look at how can we reduce costs or contain costs for healthcare, energy, workers' compensation, and so forth. Ownership transition is a big issue, as I'm sure you all are aware. We have an aging population, many small businesses. We want to ensure those businesses have an ownership transition plan and ideally foster employee ownership options where that makes sense. Better connect businesses to workforce and education, and that is something that's going to directly tie into our next area, which is workforce and education. And then create a target sector support. In looking at cluster analysis, which really looks at what are your strongest clusters of business, where is there opportunity for growth, what are the growing areas in the economy, we try to identify 12 sectors that we feel have historic strength in Vermont and are critical to the Vermont economy. Some of them are actually critical to the Vermont lifestyle as well, and those have an asterisk after them. They are advanced manufacturing, arts and culture, biotechnology and biosciences, education, finance and insurance, food systems, forest products, healthcare, green businesses, renewable energy and efficiency, software and information technology, and tourism and recreation. Identifying these 12 sectors has already been very, very useful for us as we start to think about things like what types of education programs do we want to encourage? How can we network and build great training opportunities where there is an existing and emerging cluster of businesses? And now I'm going to come to the one that I think all of you are very keen about, and which, frankly, in all of our conversations around the state, workforce and education has come up as probably the most critical need. And the good news is I think it's the need that's probably the most addressable. And I think it's one where all of you in this room can really have a significant impact. One of the challenges is that we do not have a growing population here. We have an aging population. We are not known for our birth rates, unfortunately. But we have a really hardworking and very dedicated population. We have a great education system. So our focus is, yes, we want to grow jobs, but even more importantly, we set our measure at let's grow productivity. And what does that mean? If we can grow productivity, it should mean that wages increase. And this shows exactly how the GDP per worker ties in with average wages. It means that businesses can be more successful. It means that we may not have the largest workforce in New England, but that we have the best workforce in New England. Very highly skilled, highly motivated. You know, I always like to sort of compare us with Switzerland, which is about our size. And, you know, you think about the skill sets, the craftsmanship, the level of quality there, and Vermont has that same capacity. We also know that wages directly track with education. The more that we can raise the educational level of our workforce, both in the, you know, and I'm going to say education certainly at the undergraduate level, at the high school level, and what we're seeing even more importantly is ongoing addition of skills in education in very specific sectors, the more we're going to see prosperity for those workers. There were 10, again, keep in mind these ideas were developed over the past year, so some of them again are already underway, which is the great news, and we are going to continue to update this every single year, submit it to the Federal Economic Development Authority, and the initiatives that are listed here help, or any project or initiative that is listed in the CEDS can pre-qualify a project for federal funding. So it's very important that we continue to add to this list. But the key initiatives that we outlined were having a workforce needs assessment survey. And I know, Joyce Judy at CCV, you've been a leader in doing those in the past, and it's something that I think we need to continue to grow on to really understand what are the ongoing needs of businesses, not just today, but what are the anticipated needs. And I know Annie's group is working hard towards this. The statewide coordination of training programs. Training exists for many, many different types of populations across state government. And if nothing else, this CEDS process has been a really good rallying point for us to talk among agencies to really try to better coordinate, and I think that's certainly happening right now in a number of different areas. John Fisher and the Department of Education has identified priority career pathways. And what he is really working to do, and what we hope this initiative will do, is identify what are the skills, even at the high school and grade school level, that will lead towards jobs in tourism, in health, in manufacturing, in software and IT. And I know the other two. I'm going to have to look at my cheat sheet. Food systems and green building. Statewide digital literacy network. We are, you know, one of our challenges as a state is that we have lots of small population centers. Transportation is not always accessible. We do very well in our urban centers, but how can we help some of the more rural areas, the people who might traditionally have worked in the local grocery store or hardware store, which is no longer there? How do we find jobs for people who may not be able to leave their home or travel very far? Statewide digital literacy network is something that we can really develop. The Department of Libraries has already taken an initiative on this. The SBDCs received a grant last year to work with small businesses on digital literacy. Vermont is extremely well poised to be a big contender in digital businesses right now. In this last year, we saw that Vermont led all the states in terms of its use of Google AdWords increase. We had a 400% increase in the use of Google AdWords. So clearly, many Vermonters are understanding that their business might be local, but their market can be global. So we will work with a number of different organizations to try to improve access to internet and to web-based skills, marketing, SEO, etc. The Vermont Strong Scholars Program. I think many of you, raise your hand if you're familiar with that program. So that was actually part of Act 199, and I know a lot of people, Dan Smith and Allie Richards and Lucy LaRiche and Pat Moulton, have all been working very hard on it. It is a program that would actually provide tuition reimbursement for Vermont students who go on to pursue education in Vermont that leads to a job in Vermont in certain high skill, high need categories such as computer software and engineering. And we are currently working with the state colleges on trying to get that up and running. Again, thinking about the rural nature, using libraries as anchors for community learning. Thinking outside of some of the traditional education and workforce opportunities. I shouldn't say every town, but many of the small towns have libraries. They're obviously no longer being used just as the way libraries were used historically, but can they become learning centers, training centers for an adult workforce? We have a number of regions that have done really great jobs in establishing a career week, and I'll say Bennington in particular, where students are learning about different industries, and then during career week, those industries are opening the doors to those students, allowing them to come in and see what manufacturing really is like, and dispelling the myths about, this job might not be what your grandfather did, and really trying to get Vermont students excited about Vermont careers. There's also a program that the Department of Labor has been leading in terms of the Make Vermont Home campaign, and this has a number of different outreaches, but it's really, again, trying to connect Vermonters with Vermont job opportunities. And the corollary of that is something that we've initiated too at the state level called the Great Jobs in Vermont campaign, where we are actually using alumni newsletters. We're using our Department of Tourism marketing and doing a lot of outreach to people who may have grown up here, may have gone to school here, to tell them, hey, Vermont's a great place to live, to work, to raise a family, and here are direct jobs that might meet your skill sets. We have a LinkedIn page that has over 600 participants right now. We're posting regularly both there and on the Vermont Department of Labor job link site, various jobs as well as the reasons why you should come back and work here. We're also looking at the evolving role of college in career training. We have met with a number of the universities, UVM, Middlebury, Champlain, who are eager to really play a larger and ongoing role in training people, both Vermonters and those who come from out of state, for the jobs that are going to be here in Vermont tomorrow and the years after. And we're working really hard to try to connect those universities and educational institutions directly with employers so they have a much better sense of what are the skills that are needed and what is the training that is desired. And then lastly, keeping college grads in Vermont. And a lot of these other programs are sort of addressing that as well, but we're looking at how do we increase internships? How do we make sure that there's credit given for them? How do we work with businesses so that students can actually work while they're getting their degrees? And a number of other initiatives. So these are all various ideas that are underway. We are going to be reaching out for people who would like to work on any of these projects. So if there is one of these that you feel directly speaks to you, either professionally or personally, please let myself or Pat Moulton know, and we will get you into one of these working groups. I'm going to just pause here for a second to find out if there are any questions. I've gone through this very quickly so far.
Talk a little bit about the structure of those working groups. Are they just around these 10 or about all of the CEDS?
We're doing working groups for all of the CEDS, so if there are other, and again, you have the document there, if there are other areas that interest you, by all means, please let us know.
And those are all statewide?
They're statewide. So in the remaining time, I'm going to quickly go through some of the other initiatives and the other categories here that we're looking at, action areas. We obviously want to preserve our working landscape. It's interesting because we always come into this question of, are we a bucolic, beautiful working landscape? Are we innovative, high tech? And the answer is both. And recently there was a very interesting study that was done by the Vermont Roots Migration Study, which said the number one reason that people return to Vermont is not for a job, it's actually for the working landscape. And I think returning for a job was number 2 or 3. So what we need to recognize is the importance of that working landscape in attracting workers here and also in attracting businesses. As we talk to business people who are looking at relocating to Vermont, I'd say 90% of the time, certainly in my experience, I looked at Pat, who has a lot more experience in this area, and Frank, it's because they had some tie to the landscape of Vermont. So clearly we want to preserve our working landscape, we want to keep it working. And there were a number of initiatives that surround workforce development in the working lands arena, where the forestry, agriculture, or tourism. We need to keep our forests and forest products viable. Certainly because it's an historic sector, because we have a lot of expertise in it. It's also a growing sector. We actually are seeing the demand for wood products increase throughout the nation, and certainly in Vermont. It's also how we are going to retain our resiliency when it comes to flooding. It's also how we are going to help preserve the quality of our waters too. And that all ties into enhancing the resiliency of the landscape. We all saw what happened during Tropical Storm Irene. If the land had been denuded, it would have been far, far worse. And I'd say one of our largest challenges too is going to meet the new Lake Champlain and Long Island Sound total maximum daily load standards for water quality. Enhancing the Vermont brand, and that does speak to the are we cows or are we tech question, and it's something that I think should not be polarizing. It should be we are both. And we are currently working with a number of different organizations and doing the best we can on a shoestring budget to try and get the word out that we have a very, very vibrant tech community and great jobs here in Vermont. And that speaks directly to attracting and retaining young people. Hence the Great Jobs in Vermont campaign. Hence the rise we're seeing of young professionals groups around the state. Hence our support of programs such as Launch VT, which encourages entrepreneurship. And last year was won by two 23-year-olds from Middlebury who have a terrific business plan. We also want to leverage our reputation of quality, authenticity, and craftsmanship. And I think all of you who work really directly with the Vermont workforce know that that is really something valuable and unparalleled. We often hear from businesses who have operations out of state that they might move one aspect of their operation to another facility, but it's not done as well. And often they move it back here because of that workforce. And lastly, to promote the quality of life here. Again, quality of life is what caused a skier to say, hey, this would be a great place for my little company to make chips. And that's why IBM is here. And quality of life is the reason why we see new companies like Green Sea, an underwater robotics company operating out of Richmond. And one thing we heard loud and clear was that we have a spirit of innovation here. We need to cultivate that spirit. And that spirit needs to be cultivated at all levels, from the worker, the line worker who needs to understand how critical what he or she is doing is to creating a new product, to innovation in terms of startups, to innovation in education. We're seeing a real kind of burgeoning mushrooming of incubators and maker spaces, which teach people skills. So you might ask somebody, do you want to be a welder? And they might say no, but then they say, would you like to come in and try welding at this maker space? And that kid might get really excited at that prospect. We clearly are looking at supporting and enhancing the startup culture. And we're doing it in very, very innovative ways through things obviously like Launch VT, the business plan competition, Road Pitch, which involved a number of venture capitalists and RDCs riding around the state on motorcycles looking for great business ideas last year. Number of other, and Peak Pitch, which involves an elevator pitch on a chairlift. We're trying to network and engage those young professionals around the state. One of the challenges we hear outside of the Chittenden County area is, okay, so I might move here if I'm a 30-year-old, but what is there to do? Who am I going to date if I want to date outside of my working group? So we need to really try to look to creating clusters and communities of young professionals. Better connecting educational institutions with businesses. And this is something we're doing at all levels, ranging from thinking about the intellectual property, the business ideas, connecting the faculty with opportunities to develop their ideas, all the way down to really thinking about the internships and career opportunities. And we're currently working on building an innovation index similar to what the state of Maine has that measures how well is your state fostering this culture of innovation. Lastly, resiliency. We received funding for this project through the federal government. It was entirely federally funded. and it was based on building economic resiliency as well as natural resiliency. We also need to think about how do we build resiliency in each of our various regions. And certainly we saw with the challenge that the departure of Energy Vermont and Yankee presented, that we need to continue to think about how do we grow jobs there. And that's what the Vermont, the Windham County Economic Development Grants are for. It was really focused on job creation. And also to identify the costs and opportunities that are connected with climate change. Paul Costello is putting on a great program next week that's going to look at climate change and the climate economy, which I think will address some of these issues. So what are our next steps? We are already working on assigning various teams and leaders to a number of these different initiatives. We are, in certain instances, have already built work plans. We recognize we cannot do everything at once. We are, small state, limited resources. Some people are doing this as their hobby. Some people are doing this as their job. And we're very cognizant of that, but we really appreciate participation and welcome it. So I encourage anybody who would like to participate to please let us know. We're also looking at identifying funding sources and opportunities. Again, any project that is mentioned here, whether it's a traditional economic development project or an education project, gets certain favorable recognition from the federal government if you apply for funding. So a case in point, we applied for the early childhood education grant, and that was directly mentioned here as an opportunity, yes, for childhood education, but also as an opportunity to free up one spouse to perhaps return to the workforce sooner. And we were delighted to have had that be a successful application. We'll continue to add. We're in the process of identifying new initiatives and projects that will be added in, and this document will be updated annually and submitted back to the the Economic Development Authority. And we will update this annually over the next 5 years, and then we'll apply for funding to sort of do a a look back at where we were and a look forward at where we need to be. We are the first state in the nation to have actually completed this one as an entire state. There are a number of regional ones, ECOS project in Chittenden County, CEDS in southern Vermont, Two Rivers Ottaquechee, all have them as well. So what we do is we work with those regions. We are not trying to compete in any way, but we want to really try to think about what are projects that could benefit the state as a whole, what are ideas that are transferable around the state. So that's it, and any questions?
Lisa,
Okay,
thank you so much.
thank you.
There's no question. Will you be staying with us?
Yes.
Yes. So in the course of a lot of discussion, any issues that come up that would relate to this, you're encouraged to continue that conversation. We're going to move right along then.
I'm right on track, 140.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry, I spoke too quick.